is studied in Japan today. But also, from time to time, you'll hear rare recordings of Alan Watts himself, recorded in seminar, elaborating on certain points from the book. If you've already heard our tape entitled The Way of Zen, this program will give you a greater understanding of the history of Zen and will familiarize you with the way that Zen is studied in Japan today. If this is your first Audio Renaissance Alan Watts tape, please be assured it's not necessary to have heard The Way of Zen first. This tape is complete unto itself, either as an introduction to Zen or as fresh insights into the study of Zen from one of the world's most knowledgeable authorities. And now, may I introduce you to Zen Practice, Zen Art.
Western thought has changed so rapidly in this century that we are in a state of considerable confusion. Familiar concepts of space, time, and motion, of nature and natural law, of history and social change, of human personality itself, have dissolved, and we find ourselves adrift without landmarks in a universe which more and more resembles the Buddhist principle of the Great Void. The various wisdoms of the West, religious, philosophical, and scientific, do not offer much guidance to the art of living in such a universe, and we find the prospects of making our way in so trackless an ocean of relativity rather frightening. For we are used to absolutes, to firm principles and laws to which we can cling for spiritual and psychological security. That may be why there is so much interest in a culturally productive way of life, which, for some 1,500 years, has felt thoroughly at home in the void, and which not only feels no terror for it, but rather a positive delight. To use its own words, the situation of Zen has always been above, not a tile to cover the head, below, not an inch of ground for the foot. But the scientifically trained Westerner is a cautious and skeptical fellow who likes to know what he is getting into. This tape does not advocate importing Zen from the Far East, for there it has become deeply involved with cultural institutions which are quite foreign to us. But there is no doubt that there are things which we can learn or unlearn from Zen and apply in our own way. Historically, Zen may be regarded as the fulfillment of long traditions of Indian and Chinese culture, though it is actually much more Chinese than Indian. And, since the 12th century, it has rooted itself deeply and most creatively in the culture of Japan. It is not a religion or philosophy. It is not a psychology or a type of science. It is rather an example of what is known in India and China as a way of liberation, and is as much Taoist as Buddhist.
Zen is a translation of the Sanskrit word jnana, pronounced Chan in Chinese and Zen in Japanese. It is unfortunately untranslatable in English. It designates a certain state of consciousness, but is sometimes called meditation, but that won't do it all. Contemplation isn't really the point. And sometimes one-pointedness of mind. I would prefer to translate this word with the notion of total presence of mind. When we say a person is crazy, we often say they're not all there. I'll go to the opposite of that and visualize a person who is completely there, or who is completely here. A person who lives totally and absolutely now. That doesn't mean he's incapable of thinking about the past or the future, because thoughts about the past and about the future are included in the present. You have them now. But imagine the kind of person who is not distracted, who when he talks to you, really gives you his whole being. The Tao is a way of life. The word Tao means the way, the course of nature, the flow of things. And in order to understand this point of view, we have to make a very, very radical adjustment in our ordinary common sense. Because Zen and Taoism in common involve not a system of doctrine, not a set of beliefs as we ordinarily understand religion, They involve a transformation of your consciousness. That is to say, of the way in which you experience your own existence at every moment. One might say that the average individual, not only in the West but also in the East, has a feeling of himself as separate from his surroundings, from other people, and from the earth itself, and from the space and the stars and everything around the earth. He feels this in such a way that it's expressed in all the phrases of common speech. We talk about coming into the world. I came into this world. As a matter of fact, you didn't. You came out of it. Just in the same way as an apple comes out of an apple tree, as an expression of the apple tree. The world that we live in and we experience is not cut up into things and events. It all goes together in the same way that the bees and the flowers go together, only we don't notice this. We've got a way of thinking which splits it all up, and as a result of that we think of ourselves, and so feel ourselves, as if we were something separate from the whole domain of nature. And to make a long story short, and to tell you the whole point right at the beginning, the disciplines of Taoism and of Zen propose to change your consciousness in such a way that you will no longer feel that you are an isolated unit locked up inside a bag of skin, but that you will actually experience the fact that your real self, the real you, is everything that there is, but concentrated and expressing itself at the point called your physical organism. We as individual organisms, as what we call physical bodies, we come and go like leaves on a tree, but there's the tree. And you are the tree. In the saying of Jesus, I am the vine, you are the branches. But that I am, before Abraham was I am, is the self, and is what the Hindus call the Brahman, and the Chinese call the Tao.
The Indian Buddhist origins of Zen. Fundamental to the life and thought of India from the very earliest times is the great mythological theme of self-sacrifice, whereby God gives birth to the world, and whereby men, following the divine pattern, reintegrate themselves with God. As Prajapati, Vishnu or Brahma, the Lord under many names, creates the world by an act of self-dismemberment, self-forgetting, whereby the one becomes many, and the single actor plays innumerable parts. The 1,000 heads, eyes, and feet of the Purusha are the members of the human race and other beings. For the point is that which knows, in and through every individual, is God himself, the Atma, or self of the world. Every life is a part or role in which the mind of God is absorbed, somewhat as an actor absorbs himself in being Hamlet and forgets that in real life he is Mr. Smith. By the act of self-abandonment, God becomes all beings. It is important to remember that this picture of the world as the play, Lila, of God, is mythological in form. According to the myth, the divine play goes on through endless cycles of time, through periods of manifestation and withdrawal of the worlds. The foregoing myth is not the expression of a formal philosophy, but of an experience or state of consciousness which is called moksha, or liberation. It may be considered as the discovery of who or what I am, when I am no longer identified with any role or conventional definition of my person. Indian philosophy does not describe the content of this discovery except in mythological terms, using the phrase, I am Brahman, or that art thou, to suggest that self-knowledge is a realization of one's original identity with God. Moksha is also understood as liberation from Maya, one of the most important words in Indian philosophy, both Hindu and Buddhist. The manifold world of facts and events is said to be Maya. To say then that the world of facts and events is Maya is to say that facts and events are terms of measurement rather than realities of nature. This point of view is somewhat startling and even quite hard to understand for those long accustomed to think that things, facts, and events are the very building blocks of the world, the most solid of solid realities. Yet a proper understanding of the Maya doctrine is one of the most essential prerequisites for the study of Buddhism. Buddhists prefer to speak of reality as non-dual rather than one, since the concept of one must always be in relation to that of many. The doctrine of Maya is therefore a doctrine of relativity. It is saying that things, facts, and events are delineated not by nature, but by human description, and that the way in which we describe or divide them is relative to our varying points of view. In summary, then, the Maya doctrine points out first the impossibility of grasping the actual world in the mind's net of words and concepts, and second, the fluid character of those very forms which thought attempts to define. The world of facts and events is altogether nama, abstract names, and rupa, fluid form. It escapes both the comprehension of the philosopher and the grasp of the pleasure seeker, like water from a clutching fist. It is precisely this realization of the total elusiveness of the world which lies at the root of Buddhism. This is the special shift of emphasis which, more than anything else, distinguishes the doctrine of the Buddha from the teaching of the Upanishads. Gautama, the awakened one, or Buddha, lived at a time when the major Upanishads were already in existence. That was in the 6th century, and their philosophy must be seen as the point of departure for his own teaching. For 7 years, Gautama had struggled by the traditional means of yoga and tapas, contemplation and asceticism, to penetrate the cause of man's enslavement to Maya, to find release from the vicious circle of clinging to life, Trishna, which is like trying to make the hand grasp itself. All his efforts had been in vain. The eternal Atman, the real self, was not to be found. However much he concentrated upon his own mind to find its root and ground, he found only his own effort to concentrate. The evening before his awakening, he simply gave up, relaxed his ascetic diet, and ate some nourishing food. Thereupon, he felt at once that a profound change was coming over him. He sat beneath the bo tree, vowing never to rise until he had attained the supreme awakening, and according to a tradition, sat all through the night until the first glimpse of the morning star suddenly provoked a state of perfect clarity and understanding. This was his Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, unexcelled, complete awakening, liberation from Maya, and from the everlasting round of birth and death, samsara, which goes on and on for as long as a man tries in any way whatsoever to grasp his own life. The Buddha set forth his doctrine in the form of 4 noble truths. The first truth is concerned with the problematic word dukkha, loosely translatable as suffering, which designates the great disease of the world, for which the Buddha's method, dharma, is the cure. This, however, cannot be compressed into the sweeping assertion that life is suffering. The point is rather that life as we usually live it is suffering, or more exactly, is bedeviled by the peculiar frustration which comes from attempting the impossible. Perhaps, then, frustration is the best equivalent of dukkha. The second noble truth relates to the cause of frustration, which is said to be trishna, clinging, or grasping, based on avidya, which is ignorance or unconsciousness. Now, avidya is the formal opposite of awakening. It is the state of the mind when hypnotized or spellbound by Maya, so that it mistakes the abstract world of things and events for the concrete world of reality. At a still deeper level, it is the lack of self-knowledge, lack of the realization that all grasping turns out to be the futile effort to grasp oneself, or rather, to make life catch hold of itself. The third noble truth is concerned with the ending of self-frustration, of grasping, and of the whole viciously circular pattern of karma which generates the round. The ending of karma is called nirvana. Nirvana could be described as despiration. It is the act of one who has seen the futility of trying to hold his breath or life, prana, indefinitely, since to hold the breath is to lose it. Thus, nirvana is the equivalent of moksha, release or liberation. Nirvana is the way of life which ensues when clutching at life has come to an end. To attain nirvana is also to attain Buddhahood, awakening. But this is not attainment in any ordinary sense, because no acquisition and no motivation are involved. It is impossible to desire nirvana, or to intend to reach it, for anything desirable or conceivable as an object of action is, by definition, not nirvana. Nirvana can only arise unintentionally, spontaneously, when the impossibility of self-grasping has been thoroughly perceived. The fourth noble truth describes the eightfold path of the Buddha's Dharma, that is, the method or doctrine whereby self-frustration is brought to an end. The first two sections have to do with thought, the following four have to do with action, and the final two to do with contemplation or awareness. The four sections dealing with action are often misunderstood because they have a deceptive similarity to a system of morals. Buddhism does not share the Western view that there is a moral law enjoined by God or by nature, which it is one's duty to obey. The Buddha's precepts of conduct, abstinence from taking life, taking what is not given, exploitation of the passions, lying and intoxication, are voluntarily assumed rules of expediency, the intent of which is to remove the hindrances to clarity, to awareness. Failure to observe the precepts produces bad karma, not because karma is a law or moral retribution, but because all motivated and purposeful actions, whether conventionally good or bad, are karma insofar as they are directed to the grasping of life. Generally speaking, the conventionally bad actions are rather more grasping than the good, but the higher stages of Buddhist practice are as much concerned with disentanglement from good karma as from bad. Thus, complete action is ultimately free, uncontrived, or spontaneous action, in exactly the same sense as the Taoist Wu Wei.
This means not to force things. That's the best English translation I've come to. It's sometimes translated not doing, no artificiality, no interference. But our word forcing, as when a forced laugh, forcing a lock, forced behavior, forced kindness, forced love, in that sense forcing. Don't force it. So it means action in accordance with the character of the moment and of the circumstances in which you are. You see, you can't not interfere with the world. Everything you do interferes with your environment. To know things is to change them. You cannot not interfere. So the idea is to learn how to interfere skillfully. That's the meaning of Wu Wei.
Smriti, recollectedness, and samadhi, contemplation, constitute the section dealing with the life of meditation, the inner, mental practice of the Buddha's way. Complete recollectedness is a constant awareness or watching of one's sensations, feelings, and thoughts, without purpose or comment. It is a total clarity and presence of mind, actively passive, wherein events come and go like reflections on a mirror. Nothing is reflected except what is. Through such awareness, it is seen that the separation of the thinker from the thought, the knower from the known, the subject from the object, is purely abstract. There is not the mind on the one hand and its experiences on the other. There is just a process of experiencing in which there is nothing to be grasped as an object and no one as a subject to grasp it. Seen thus, the process of experiencing ceases to clutch at itself. Thought follows thought without interruption, that is, without any need to divide itself from itself, so as to become its own object. The non-duality of the mind, in which it is no longer divided against itself, is samadhi. And because of the disappearance of that fruitless threshing around of the mind to grasp itself, samadhi is a state of profound peace. This is not the stillness of total inactivity. For once the mind returns to its natural state, samadhi persists at all times, in walking, standing, sitting, and lying. But from the earliest times, Buddhism has especially emphasized the practice of recollectedness and contemplation while sitting. Most images of the Buddha show him in the posture of sitting meditation, the posture of the lotus, with the legs crossed and the feet resting, soles upward, upon the thighs. Sitting meditation is not, as is often supposed, a spiritual exercise, a practice followed for some ulterior object. From a Buddhist standpoint, it is simply the proper way to sit, and it seems perfectly natural to remain sitting so long as there is nothing else to be done, and so long as one is not consumed with nervous agitation. To the restless temperament of the West, sitting meditation may seem to be an unpleasant discipline, because we do not seem to be able to sit, just to sit, without qualms of conscience, without feeling that we ought to be doing something more important to justify our existence. Because the teaching of the Buddha was a way of liberation, it had no other object than the experience of nirvana. The Buddha did not attempt to set forth a consistent philosophical system, trying to satisfy that intellectual curiosity about ultimate things which expects answers in words. When pressed for such answers, when questioned about the nature of nirvana, the origin of the world, and the reality of the self, the Buddha maintained a noble silence, and went on to say that such questions were irrelevant and did not lead to the actual experience of liberation. It has often been said that the later development of Buddhism was due to the inability of the Indian mind to rest content with that silence, so that at last it had to indulge its overwhelming urge for abstract metaphysical speculations about the nature of reality. There are two sets of Buddhist scriptures: the Pali Canon of the Southern School of Buddhism, which flourishes in Ceylon, Burma, and Thailand, and the Sanskrit Tibetan Chinese canon of the Mahayana, or Northern School. The vast body of Mahayana doctrine arose not so much to satisfy intellectual curiosity as to deal with the practical psychological problems encountered in following the Buddha's way. Certainly the treatment of these problems is highly scholastic, and the intellectual level of the Mahayana texts is very lofty. But the